morning. I'm Mayor Tommy Roberts. Welcome back to the Mayor's Table. This is our first segment since December 19th. We've taken about a 3-week vacation, and we're eager to get started with these programs again. And we have some good programs lined out for you for the next 5 or 6 weeks. And it's great to have you back with us. My guest this morning is State Senator Steve Neville, who has been in the legislature for a number of years now. And we're going to let him talk a little bit more about that. But Steve, welcome to the Mayor's Table.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Steve, the 2017 legislative session begins tomorrow in Santa Fe, January 17th. And it's a 60-day session. Mm-hmm. I imagine that you have to gear up mentally and physically for 60-day sessions.
You know, until you've actually been in the legislature a while and have experienced it, it's an unusual. I can't even describe it. It's really a challenge to, like you say, get your mind ready and get geared up. You have to file your bills ahead of time, get them all online, as many as you can, and then of course you got to pack your bags and plan on being gone 60 days. And you get home a few times, but it's still a major thought process to get through it. And it's even harder coming home after you've done it for 60 days.
Yeah, you have to probably have a week or two of recuperation.
You have to scale yourself back down for a while.
Yeah. So you're geared up mentally and for quite a long period of time, but it's not just a 60-day session for you. It's a year-round process.
It's year-round. We have committees year-round. I'm on LFC, Legislative Finance Committee, and we meet essentially every month, all year long, for sometimes as long as a week at a time. And we draft a budget that we've introduced. It's been published, and we're going to start tackling fine-tuning that budget. We take the executive budget and we take our legislative budget, and we try to blend the two together to something that the governor will sign, and the legislators, of course, would vote for ahead of time.
Mm-hmm. You're a familiar figure to most people in San Juan County, most of our viewers, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. But let's talk a little bit about your history as a state legislator. When did you begin?
Well, I've been in there 12 years, just re-elected. I'll be in there another 4, hopefully. Everything will go well. And prior to that, I was a county commissioner for 8 years, so I've got a pretty good understanding of what goes on in the county and what activities and concerns that are on everybody's mind here in the county, and hopefully that translates into being able to represent the citizens well.
Describe to the viewers your district boundaries.
Well, my district is basically Aztec, Bloomfield, the eastern part of Farmington, and then all the way to the state line, including the La Plata area.
So you have many people, many constituents in that district. Do you know the number of constituents?
When we redistrict every time, this last time, just over 50,000 was the population number we used in each Senate district. And you know, the populations change over time. We did that a number of years ago, but it's somewhere in the 50,000 range.
What committee assignments do you have?
Well, during the interim, I'm on the Legislative Finance Committee, and that's the one that develops the budget, the draft budget that we start with the session with. During the session, I'll serve on the Senate Finance Committee, and that's my only committee assignment, and that's because that committee meets almost continuously all during the session.
Very important committee assignment, one with a lot of responsibility.
It's the Budget Committee, and of course the budget is what funds everything the state does.
Particularly in light of the economic struggles, the fiscal struggles that the state is experiencing now. And we go into this legislative session knowing that you're about $70 million down in revenue for the current fiscal year and projecting over $300 million deficit in revenue for fiscal year 18. So what are you going to do to rectify those problems?
Well, it's hard to say exactly what will finally come out. The first couple of weeks that we're down there, starting this week, is we're going to try to resolve the current fiscal year shortfall. We're 70 million or so, 69, I think is the estimate, but that's somewhat of a guess. But we can't finish the year if we don't fix that. So that's probably going to be looking at any kind of cash balances. We've got certainly some more spending cuts on some programs that we think we can actually reduce. But we only have half a year, actually less than half a year, to try to resolve that. So you can't cut too much because most of the year is already passed, and our fiscal year ends June 30th, so we've only got a few months left. And other than that, we're going to have to look at any cash balances that are available to us to re-divert into the general fund so that we can pay the bills.
Yeah. And of course, the legislature met in special session, was it in October of last year?
Right.
And the purpose of that special session was to deal with some negative projections as well, and trying to find some money there.
Yeah, we had hoped at that time that we would not have a problem of $70 million. There's two things that happened. First off, we underestimated or overestimated the revenues, and then the other thing is there was about $20-some million in a proposal in some of the education funding that the governor vetoed, and that $20 million is part of that 70 shortfall that we have. So two things, not enough money coming in, and the plans that we laid out didn't quite materialize.
As we look forward to the fiscal year 2018 budgeting process at the state level, your projections are based on, in large part, on pricing for oil and natural gas, because our state is obviously so reliant on oil and natural gas production. And so you have preliminary numbers based on current pricing. Is there any optimism that those numbers may be more positive than
well, as you know,
they're
oil
projected
is
now?
Currently over $50, and that's better than it was a year ago. We were looking at, I think back then we were in the $30 range, as I recall. So substantially better, but that's only the direct revenue. There's we estimate that about a third of our state budget is directly or indirectly funded by oil and gas activity. So part of it is the actual taxes and revenue that we get off of oil sales. The other part of it is indirect, and that includes the salaries paid to the oil field workers, the gross receipts that those people spend whenever they go to the Walmart store. All of those things, corporate taxes, of course, all of those things go into a bucket, and we estimate that that's roughly a third of our budget. And if oil and gas is not doing well, then that third of the budget is looking a little bit hard to fill. So that's where our shortfall has primarily come from, but it has a ripple effect through the entire economy. Albuquerque is projecting something like a $30 million shortfall. They don't see it as being oil and gas, but a lot of that filters into the state into Albuquerque from all corners of the state.
I want to talk a little bit about how all of this bodes for counties and cities, local government entities. But before I do that, I want to take a look at it from the perspective of those involved in education. I know that in the special session, higher education got hit
That's right.
to some extent, and so they're feeling the impacts of that, and they're probably concerned that they may be targeted here in this 60-day session that begins tomorrow to deal with the state shortfalls. K through 12 didn't feel much of an impact from the special session in October of last year, but I think there is some talk about looking at cash reserves that are being held by school districts. What can you say about that?
Well, the cash reserves is they're $200 and some million around the state, and that's one of the pots of money that the legislature may be looking at to try to fill that. That's to fill the shortfall for the current fiscal year. Education, we have tried as best we can over the years to hold as harmless as possible. The situation with education is that it's almost 45% of our total budget, about $2.5 billion out of a $6 billion budget that the state has. We spend another billion on higher education and another billion on Medicaid. Those three are the major components of our budget. It doesn't leave much. If you add that up, that's what, 2.5, 3.5, 4.5, almost $5 billion out of six. So whatever's left is what we have to pay for the state police and the courts and all of the other things that the state does to take care of children and whatever the needs are of the state. So there's not much we can, at this point, with the budget being so tight, education is going to be in a tough spot as far as being able to hold it as level as we have in the past.
Okay. And then let's talk about cities and county governments. What do those of us involved with those governmental entities need to be concerned about with respect to the state's problem in generating enough to deal with the deficit that's being projected?
Well, as you know, the state imposed a bill prior to the time I was in the legislature, proposed a law that did away with the food tax. Well, that impacted cities and counties adversely if there was no way of making that up. So the state proposed a program, they call it the Hold Harmless program. That funding is to approximate what the city would have received in terms of funding from food and medical. Those two items were taken off the tax rolls. That was improperly estimated in the beginning, so it's been problematic for the state for many years. There has been many proposals to try to do away with that program, and certainly that would be a factor. I've fought with that situation where they've tried to deal with it many times over the years that I've been in the legislature, because as my history as a county commissioner told me, it would not be easy for a county or a city to try to make up for those shortfalls if that hold harmless funding wasn't there. So I think that there's going to be some concern from cities and counties that the legislature will come in and try to do something to affect that program that would adversely affect the funding that's distributed to the cities.
Yeah, I appreciate that explanation. And in fact, Rob Mays, our city manager, and I have met with our San Juan County legislative delegation to talk about the concerns we have about potential hold harmless legislation. And we have talked about it many times on this program as we try to keep our constituents informed about our financial health, our financial situation here at the city of Farmington. And we are obviously very concerned about what may come out. What is the dynamic that exists in the state legislature as a result of Democrats and Republicans and their different worldviews about taxes and taxation? And how would that play into anything that we might see come out of the legislature dealing with the hold harmless issues?
Well, just in general, the concept of taxing food on the surface looks bad. People don't like to think that they have to pay tax on their food to survive. But on the other hand, when that bill was actually passed years ago and repealed the food tax, they placed a tax on all non-food items. So in essence, the folks that were on what we call SNAP benefits now, or food stamps, they were not paying tax on food. But whenever they imposed a tax on all non-food items, it actually raised the taxes for people who had of low income. So it didn't accomplish what I think the people who were advocating that, it was under the Bill Richardson administration, and I don't think it accomplished what they wanted to do. New Mexico is a gross receipts tax state. We tax, in theory, we tax everything. Now there's lots of exemptions and pitfalls in that whole process that's been part of the problem that's made our tax structure a little bit awkward. But if we don't, the food is a big component, and it is now being aggravated by the fact that online sales are taking away from the non-food items that people buy. Amazon.com doesn't charge you tax when you order a new pair of shoes online, and I'm as guilty as anybody. I buy stuff online just like probably 90% of the people out there. But you don't buy food online. Food is the most stable component that we could tax. And if we didn't tax the non-food items as heavily and shifted it over to the food side, we could see that the city's revenue would be more stable, as well as the state's. And that's been one of the big factors that kept us from being solvent in the last couple of years since oil and gas has been off, is that we didn't have that component. The food tax actually is a couple $100 million if you look at it in total. And that's a big number when you're talking about a state budget.
You mentioned that our gross receipts tax base has been somewhat diluted over time as a result of legislation that has allowed exemptions or credits or deductions from the tax. And there's been some talk here in the last 2 to 3 years about fixing the gross receipts tax system. And the idea has been to expand the base and reduce the tax rate. Where are we headed with that kind of a program?
Everybody thinks that's a good concept, unless it affects me. That's been the bugaboo in the whole situation. Farmers and ranchers don't pay tax on most of their components that they buy. We've given exemptions to Intel in Rio Rancho. We've given exemptions to they call it the LES facility, a multi-billion-dollar project that was built down in Hobbs. Those entities, they didn't exist before, so it's not like we're losing tax that we never got. But on the other hand, the base keeps slowly being eroded or kept from growing as much as it could because we've given so many exemptions. Food tax is just another one of them. If you're trying to tax on a broad base, you need to tax everything you possibly can on a small amount as opposed to a large amount. And if we try to do a broad-based tax, you're going to end up taxing churches when they buy commodities. You end up taxing Boy Scouts. You're going to end up taxing all kinds of nonprofit organizations. So politically, it's a difficult sell in a lot of cases. But on the other hand, everybody's taxes would be much less, and we'd probably see some benefits from the standpoint of economic development and working with entities that might want to move to New Mexico because we'd have a very low tax base.
There are many special interest groups in our state that benefit from exemptions or deductions or credits. And you're right that the challenge would be very, very high, very, very difficult to overcome all of those special interests that exist out there. But I agree with you also that if it could be done in some form or another, it would probably be the biggest economic boon to New Mexico that we could think of. And so I'm hopeful that we continue to have that discussion, that dialogue, and that we can make some progress toward that. I think it's problematic in getting that done in a 60-day session. It probably is going to take
It's a multi-year process.
a year
I
or
think.
2 or 3 years of discussion to
Right.
make sure that anything that could be adopted and enacted doesn't have unintended consequences.
That's right.
It's always a problem with legislation. Well, Steve, I want to thank you for being with us here this morning, and I know you have a huge challenge as you head to Santa Fe and you try to work on finding ways to deal with the deficits that we have and that we expect to have
Probably
in
the
the next year.
least fun session I've ever had.
I would understand that if that's
right.
going to be the case. And we're looking forward to staying in touch with you and staying advised of what's happening there. So do you have anything else you'd like to add in closing?
No, just if anybody has any concerns or issues, they can contact me through my legislative email, which is Steve Neville at nmlegis.gov, or you can call me at my office in Santa Fe.
So we want to thank Senator Neville for taking his time here this morning to be with us and to provide his insight and perspective on the upcoming legislative session. And I want to thank all of you for tuning in with us this morning, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week on the Mayor's Table.